The first day that I ever came here, I got off the bus at the Brown Bobby with Stuart Bennett, who was a year ahead of me here. And Stuart said, right, well, the game is you've got to get between the bus and the art school without using the main roads. So it was a case of going through all of the sort of little back lanes and cut-throughs and what have you, that really introduced you to an alternative Douglas. You know, I came from Peel, so you only ever came into Douglas as a treat, and to actually then have Douglas as your essentially the landscape that you were going to work in, it was a great eye-opener. Well, I came in here for the first time in September in 1967. The things that I did in here and the people that I met in here for the 2 years that I was here on doing foundation course with Norman Sale changed me absolutely as an individual, and they really changed the sort of course of my future life. Essentially they made me who I became. So really the influence of what you thought art and design was actually happened here in this room with very little sort of outside influences. I'm standing here now where my table was, and I'm actually thinking about a night, because we never went home. We were thrown out at 9 o'clock each night. Chris Berry reminded me the other day that Norman sometimes had to apologize to us because we had to go home because he had an evening class or something like that. And he was apologetic that he turned us out before 9 o'clock each night. But I remember sitting here and really at the beginning of the course, I couldn't get a handle on what I should be doing. I didn't understand, I couldn't grasp the sort of strange concepts that I was being asked to sort of take in. And I sat here one night and I looked out of that window and I made a drawing. And it was that drawing really, the vigorous nature of the drawing and the way that it sort of caught this space here. That drawing really was my start on the course. And I remember pinning it on the wall there. And next day when people came in, everybody went to the drawing. And they said, who did this drawing? And it was me, and for the first time, I wasn't peripheral. I was at the center of something, and I thought, right, I've made a start. I've got to hang on to this now. I've got to somehow build on the capital that I've invested in this drawing. And really, that's where my ball started rolling. Here, pinned on that wall there, looking out of that window there. As you came in through this door here, which is the door that we came in each morning and left at 9 o'clock each evening, there was a partition here that ran perhaps to here and then perhaps this way. And this was the life drawing room. And that's a big deal when you've just come from a boys' school. Life drawing is quite a rite of passage. So I went out and got a piece of thorn tree, I think, and hung it on that wall over there, and then arranged a tank of water that allowed water to drip onto it, you know, sort of drip every half a minute or something like that. And then I arranged spotlights on the drips so that it was almost like you were forced to look at the reflection of the room in the drips. And I called it the most beautiful thing in the world by Ian Coulson, because I thought it was just so gorgeous to draw your attention to the tiniest thing that I could sort of imagine, you know. This space here was open, and there was a small printing press in here, and we did little bits of screen printing in here. So this wall wasn't here, and there was a sort of a low wall here where the steps went down. And then down into where the sculpture room and the pottery was. We didn't call it ceramics, it was the pottery. And at the bottom of the stairs here, there was essentially a little island, a room that was a little island between the corridor through to the sculpture room and whatever. And that was a little room that Mr. Miney, the caretaker, inhabited. And the guy who has the sweeping brush usually runs the place. And I've always said to my students that you need to, as soon as you get in anywhere, you need to start to make friends with the caretaker and the cleaners, because they're the most influential people in the place. And particularly now that, you know, where tutors are difficult to find on art courses, the caretaker is the man who's got the keys, and he will be the fella who will make a difference as to whether your work gets made or not. So make friends with the caretaker. Let's go down. And here then would be a narrow room that was the sculpture room. And really it was, you know, perhaps 10 feet wide. And it would just had modelling stands in it, maybe 10 modelling stands, and you could get a lump of clay from the pottery and whack it on your modelling stand, and then make whatever you wanted. Now I couldn't get on with clay. I just got an absolute antipathy for the bloody stuff. I just can't do it. And so I could never make anything that sort of satisfied me. And Morris would sort of sit there on, propped up on a stool and would tell you what was good or bad about whatever it was that you were doing. And really it was such an amorphous group of concepts. I couldn't get my head around it. And so I would often enough be up in the main studio making sculpture out of timber, out of wood, out of you know, whatever I could lay my hands on. So I made my sculpture in the absence of the sculpture teacher, which, you know, now I think about it, I'm sorry about. But at the time I wasn't sorry. I needed the freedom to be away from this bloody grey clay stuff. This was the studio that the advertising and design students worked in with Eric Hillgrave. It was, you know, if you can imagine it, before ever a computer was even thought of. All lettering was hand drawn. So up in this room there were students who, working on tiny little pieces of paper, were producing the most exquisite hand-drawn lettering, hand-drawn and coloured lettering using gouache and that sort of stuff. And they were, I was just lost in admiration for what they could do. But particularly Eric Hillgrave, his sort of memorial pieces of calligraphy that use very beautiful writing calligraphy with watercolor scenes and gilding and things like that. He was immense, and he would come up from down in the pottery, you know, with clay up his arms and all the rest of it, just rub his hands like this, and then get to work on the most exquisite things. He was an amazing man. Norman Sale, Eric, Morris particularly, would take your opinions, your concerns as 16, 17-year-olds seriously, and that they would treat you as adults. And this was so completely different to the education that I'd had at Douglas High School for Boys, where really you were a bucket to be filled with information, and what you thought of that information was of no interest to them at all. What Norman did, I think, was a kind of alchemy. I can't actually get my head around his composition, his use of colour, his choice of subjects even. You know, there's sort of beyond me, but I wanted to do something about Douglas onto the paper that I bought, and this is one that I started yesterday and will finish tomorrow, and this is the last one that I will do. I think I'm on about number 95 now with this painting, and I've got one sheet of Norman's watercolour left, which I will leave untouched, because Norman always said that there's nothing more exciting than a clean piece of drawing paper and a newly sharpened pencil, but paradoxically there's nothing more frightening too. So that's going to remain as it is. And this one is my sort of goodbye to this building, really. And I've chosen to do it as a sort of a 9 o'clock in the evening study, looking down the back lane. You know, you could go home or you could stay at art school, and we chose to stay at art school. And so this is my sort of evocation, really, of this place at night with me in the image.